Some of the most common email questions I get are about handling the rate objections that come from vendors. Interestingly, a large number of them come from fairly small lessors and brokers, and even more interestingly, they're the kind of lessors and brokers who are actually ideally positioned to deal with that issue. In my previous post, I talked about the 3 critical skills of selling in this industry: targeting and working on approvable and closable prospects, identifying and focusing on meaningful benefits, meaningful to the prospect, and differentiating ourselves from our competition in a way that shows our prospects how we're uniquely able to deliver those benefits. Here's an effective way for small lessors and brokers to use those 3 skills when dealing with rate issues with vendors. There are 2 things to remember about a vendor's interest in rates. The first is that he or she's programmed to ask about them. If you were a vendor and you got mailings or phone calls from 10 different leasing or financing sources, and they all led off with some version of, "I've got good rates," or "I've got competitive rates," and then I walked into your office as number 11, what's the first thing you'd ask me about? See, because of the way most companies sell, as an industry, we've conditioned or programmed vendors to think that's the most important thing we offer as a leasing or financing service. The second thing to remember is that, logically, it really shouldn't matter to the vendor at all because it doesn't cost them anything anyway. They don't pay the payments. As long as their customer says yes to the lease, why should they care what the rate is? Ask yourself the question this way. If every time that vendor mentioned your name in a transaction, that transaction automatically closed, would he or she really care what your rates are? Of course not. That's obvious, and it's logical to us that the vendor should feel that way. But that doesn't matter. What we need is for the vendor to see it logically like that. To do that, you just need to combine point 1 with point 2, then throw in a little dash of doubt about your larger competitors, and voila, you've got a recipe for success. Here's how you can do it. Mr. Vendor, I can understand your interest in my rates, and I can assure you that my rates are commensurate with the marketplace. But I have a problem. I don't want to needlessly limit your approvals. What do you think is the number 1 reason for leases not getting approved? And I pause very briefly. When I ask that, most people, Mr. Vendor, say it's a credit issues, but it's not right. The number 1 reason for leases getting denied isn't the credit, it's that the request is for the wrong rate for that specific credit. And here's my problem. You see, there are basically 2 kinds of companies in our business. There are very, very large, what I call assembly line companies that work on huge, high volume basis. And then there are smaller companies like mine. Those big companies can't possibly get to know you, your market, or your customers, and they know it. But what they can do is create economies of scale through volume and automation that allow them to keep their pricing low. And so that's what they push. One big way they keep their costs down is by sending vendors like you low rate charts and then depending on you to go out and weed out the poorer credit customers for them. They don't see your individual customers as separate transactions. They look at your company as a program from which they expect to approve some average number of transactions. The fact is, though, they can't afford to slow down the assembly line long enough to really look at and price for the full range of customers you're likely to deal with on a day in and day out basis. So they expect to turn down many otherwise approvable customers. That's okay with them because they've got programs like you all over the country, and on average, the numbers work out in their favor whether you get any individual sale or not. They don't turn your customers down, though, because they can't be approved. They turn them down because they can't approve them at the rates they've given you in order to get your program, and then told you to go out and quote for them. That's where I'm different. Because I'm a smaller company, I can and do look at every transaction as a separate transaction, every customer as a separate opportunity. Because I'm a small business, but have access to funding plans of a large number of large financial service companies, I can have every transaction evaluated and priced for maximum chances of approval. I can't do your job, Mr. Vendor, and I certainly don't expect you to do mine. But if you'll let me do my job, if you'll let me price every transaction for maximum chance of approval, I'll make your job easier and more profitable by getting more of your leases closed. I'll be quoting nationally competitive low rates for some folks and higher rates for others, but I'll always be focused first and foremost on one thing, and it won't be on using you to weed out folks I don't want to approve. I'll be focused 100% on quoting for the maximum possible number of approvals for both of us. Just give me a try for the next 90 days. It won't cost you or your customers anything, but it may well close some extra sales for you. Now, that approach is honest and it's direct, and most of all, it does what? It targets approvable and closable prospects. It focuses on a meaningful benefit to the vendor and differentiates you in a way that shows how you are uniquely positioned to deliver that benefit. Will it help you? Well, you probably know by now what I'm going to say. Just ask yourself this: would you rather sell this way, or would you rather compete against someone who does? That choice is yours. Thanks for watching. I'm Gerry Egan.